Heather. I'm
Hi
back
there.
from my trip, so we can do one
Welcome.
together again.
I would say welcome back, but we're not physically in the same place, and you were
No.
actually closer to me when you were traveling than you
I
are
know,
now.
isn't that funny? So we actually are on a bit of a break because we had a five Thursday week, a month this month.
Right.
Words are hard for me today. So we are doing our little chat on Thursday when we'd normally be doing our study group. And we're getting ready for our next webinar next week on beliefs, biases, and identity.
Right.
So yeah, we're hoping to teach you everything that we know about those three things in a 90-minute webinar. No, I'm kidding. We're going to scratch the surface and just start cracking open the
Barely.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we've been chatting a little bit just prior to this about biases. And what a fascinating topic, really. You and I have been sort of digging into biases for a long time, I think, along with a lot of other people in the world, and sort of cracking that open and just even realizing that you have them and how they impact you, and reading things like there are scholars and well-educated people who should be objective who hold on to their biases even in the face of
Yeah.
disproving evidence, which is a little distressing, but um, talk to me a little bit about some of what you are in the process of learning about biases and how they affect us, especially as leaders,
Yeah.
and how we can start to, yeah, like what have you been learning? What have you been reading about some of this stuff?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that seems really clear, or I've been thinking about this quite a lot and having a kind of struggling to, gather and synthesize all the things I'm thinking about and reading about and researching. But one of the things that's really coming to the forefront is how a lot of our biases are unconscious or subconscious, and they become really deeply rooted, and some of them intertwined with our identity, and so they're
Mm-hmm.
hard for us to parse out or to identify. And often they don't even show themselves until they've been threatened. Like we can't consciously know that we have that bias until there's it's called into question, or it's threatened, or we're asked to choose sides on something. So that kind of insidious nature of our biases is really coming out a lot in what I research. And as you were saying, there's this one study that was researching the biases of people who are steeped in research around bias and political bias and stuff. And these very people that have spent much of their careers studying political bias, when they were presented with evidence that disproved something that they believed, how stubbornly they clung to the belief even after there was evidence to the contrary. And it's like, what hope do we have if the most educated and thoughtful people on this are not able to adjust their own biases? But yeah, it's fascinating. But I think there's also, I mean, I don't want to say anything that feels hopeless, because I think there's
No.
also a lot of ways that we can evolve our biases and reveal themselves to ourselves. But one of the most fascinating things I've been I have this book called Whistling Vivaldi. It's probably not showing up very clear, but it's an interesting look at stereotypes and how we attach ourselves to stereotypes and don't even know that they exist in us necessarily. And the name of it comes from a story. um I think his name is Brent Staples, who is a like New York Times columnist, I think. And he shared a story. He's a black man, and he shared a story when he was a university student, I think in Chicago. But he used to he suddenly realized how much he was causing distress to people on the street who thought he was dangerous, just by being a black man on the streets. And people would like link arms or cross the street or do whatever they could to avoid him or not meet his eyes. And so this started to cause him some concern and distress, and he didn't want to make people feel uncomfortable. And like he would take alternate routes to try to make people feel more comfortable. And And then in his nervousness, he starts to whistle and realize he's actually kind of good at whistling. And so he spends a fair bit of time on the street whistling, and he's often whistling like the Beatles or Vivaldi. And he realizes that the whistling, especially if he's whistling like classic music like Vivaldi,
Mhm.
it makes people feel more safe. They start to respond to him differently. They feel, yeah, that he's no longer a threat. And so the reflection on that is like what the stereotypes around first he's seen as black man, but now when they hear whistling, that bias is at least somewhat replaced by, oh, he's a fairly educated person, so he's no longer dangerous. So education makes him safe, or having access to
Right.
Vivaldi makes him a more safe person. And probably not one of the people on the street who either avoided him or smiled at him when he was whistling Vivaldi had real consciousness of their response to him or why they
Mhm.
were responding that way. But it's just a way, it's just a fascinating, it makes me wonder, like, how many times have what am I responding to? What are the clues I'm responding to when I meet a person on the street? Like, race is
Yeah.
obviously one of them, and let's be honest, like those of us raised white, especially white settlers in North America, racism is steeped into our belief system, our
Yep.
unconscious bias. And so when you scan a crowd or you're walking down a street in a dark or semi-dark, like what are the things that you're looking for, paying attention to? I think class and wealth, access to wealth, poverty, somebody who's dressed
Yeah.
in a certain way is showing, or mental health. Like if it looks like
Hmm.
someone is maybe unstable and I can't trust them because of that. Like there are like 100 ways that we scan our kind of mental shortcuts to determine the safety of a person. And we do it, for our safety. And so some of it is actually
Yep.
rooted in our nervous system. Like it's so unconscious that's in our amygdala, it's in our
Yeah.
fight, flight, or freeze response. But I think to live in it with diversity, to live our values of actually honoring and valuing every one of these, every person, no matter what body or the level of their education or anything, we have to start unraveling that to become conscious of it. So that's, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, and how we, because the program we're offering is for leadership. How do we as leaders help people become aware of those things and then also surface them in a way that we can change some of that?
Yeah. Totally. Um, it's making me think a lot. Years and years ago, you did a coaching session with me, and you were using a process called narrative coaching, and it has always sort of stuck with me. But one of the questions you asked after I had ranted about whatever it was I was having an issue with was, what is the story you're telling yourself about that? And I think that has a lot to do with biases. Like, what is the story that is attached to that bias? And where does that story come from? And is it true? Is it
Yeah,
still true? And one of the other things that I know that you and I have talked a lot about and value a lot is the power of the pause. And it's something I tell my kids all the time. Like when you're faced with a decision, if you can literally think for 2 seconds,
yeah, yeah,
you were more likely to make a good choice than if you just impulsively do whatever
yeah,
comes to mind.
yeah,
And again, I think the same is true with biases. Like when you notice that that is happening, well, first, can you notice that it's happening? And then can you pause in long enough to figure out what is the story that I am believing here? And is it true?
yeah,
Um, yeah. And it is tough when and again, I mean, I'm even just reflecting on that story of that man and thinking like it shouldn't be his responsibility to make me comfortable when he's
right.
walking down the street.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
right.
that shouldn't be his responsibility. Like
Yeah,
great that it worked for him, I guess, but also like how unfair
yeah,
that was on him and not on the people who have not confronted their biases.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it is a reality. And I remember having a conversation with my brother who, bless his heart, was trying to be conscious of these kinds of things. And he was
Oh
asking me,
yeah.
can you help me, come up with some ways of meeting women on the street. He says, like, because I don't want to be a threat to women when I'm walking down the street,
Sure.
but should I smile at them or should I avoid eye contact or should and
Yeah.
it was hard for me to say exactly what he should do, but it was like, yeah, what are the ways that, and in my brother's case, I mean, he's a white man with privilege, obviously, so it's a little different, but there is still a mental bias. And I mean, that wasn't that long ago that we were all talking about whether you'd feel safer with the man or the bear in the woods, and
Yeah, totally.
how many of us women didn't say, well, it would be the bear.
Yeah.
And so we do have a certain, and our biases can be well informed. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of data to
Oh,
back
of course.
that we are probably more safe with the bear than the man, but then that data gets converted into like gets rooted into your nervous system. And I don't want to say there's always data, because I don't think in the
No,
case of the black
no,
man that's not necessarily a data based
no, no.
bias, but whatever the case, however we develop those biases and those kind of
Yes.
mental shortcuts, yeah, we don't make them conscious, and we can't make them all conscious. I think that would be
No.
almost overwhelming to suddenly become aware of every one of your thought processes.
Oh my gosh.
Like there's a reason why we create mental
That's
shortcuts, because
that sounds like a curse from a very angry magical being.
well, can you imagine? I mean, we talk about this all the
That's
time, but we
horrifying.
already overthink things. The simplest decision. You go into the grocery store and like, which cereal do you want? Like, I
Yeah.
want to have a certain amount of bias that makes a decision like that really
Yeah.
simple. Like I just grabbed the one that I liked last week and that's good enough.
Yeah.
That's a bias that
Totally.
helps me simplify all those points of data that I'm trying to process into a simple decision.
Yeah.
So there are places where bias is absolutely value, makes our lives simpler. But then when does it become a barrier to relationships, to equity,
Yeah.
to how we
Yeah.
want to live in community?
Totally. Totally. And yeah, it's worth asking the question, even about the cereal. Like, is my favorite the healthiest choice for me right now when I have pre-diabetes, perhaps, or whatever else, you know
Or
what I mean?
has it been shaped by a whole lot of really good capitalists who know how to market the cereal to me? Yeah,
Exactly.
it all gets
Yeah,
very complicated.
it does. And again, I mean, you can spend your whole life like trying to assess every single decision and find every single bias, but I don't think that's the point of what we're trying to offer in our webinar. I think all we're trying to do is to just surface it and ask, how are you holding that when that comes up? Like
Yeah,
when you're confronted with a bias that is causing harm or is discriminatory or whatever else, like how are
yeah,
you holding that? How are you working through it? How are you helping other people work through that stuff
yeah,
when it comes up? Yeah, it's not about judging people for their
yeah.
biases, because like you say, we all have them. um
Well, and it's almost like, you're looking after your yard and you're looking at a plant growing. Well, do I decide that that's a weed or a valuable plant to keep
yeah,
on the land? It's like, okay, this is a bias that's actually a weed, that it's causing harm to the other plants around it. Now I have to not just pluck it from the top or address the issue
yeah,
right now, but I have to get down to the root system
to the root.
and look at how is it intertwined and what's the harm that it's causing the
Yeah,
ecosystem that I'm part of. So
totally.
to bring in some of our ecosystem language again.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, no, I mean, this is not going to be a simple webinar by any stretch of the imagination. Um, and we are limited to our 2D models, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we
Unfortunately,
hope
we
you'll
have
come and
complex
explore.
minds that
Yeah,
complicate everything, but also in a fun way. We enjoy some of that
totally.
complexity, admittedly.
Totally. Totally. So if you want to learn a little more, if you want to dig a little deeper into beliefs, biases, and identity, and sort of explore how they're all kind of intertwined and relate to each other, and um,
Yeah.
we're weaving more than we're
And maybe
delineating.
start by the next time you walk down the street, like just sort of pay attention to your mental
Yeah,
shortcuts. Each person you look at, like what's your assessment of them, and
totally.
based in what, like you say, what's your story about this? Like what's
Yeah,
that rooted in?
yeah, yeah. Anything else before we let people get back to their day jobs.
Yeah, the only other thing that I'll say is we also talk about this in our other program, Know
Mhm.
Yourself. So if you want to go deeper into, if you're
Yes.
not, if the leadership program is not where you're at and you don't consider yourself a leader, the other program, which I think is a really valuable one, and we have people that come out of it just really changed by it, is called Know Yourself,
Yeah.
Self-Reflection for Wise Living. And yeah, I think it'll help you learn some of these things about yourself in gentle ways and ways
Yeah.
that are supportive, in a circle that's supportive and not quite as disruptive as being called out for causing harm, but actually
Absolutely.
looking at yourself, yeah, so that you can cause less harm, hopefully, or that you can
Totally.
live more wisely.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the hope of all our programs that what, I mean, you and I are not like, we are not so good at this that we can't learn from this stuff ourselves.
Oh, trust me, every time I develop another webinar, I have to go into my
Uh-huh.
own
Yeah.
baggage.
Yeah.
That's what makes it complicated sometimes. And yeah,
Hmm.
you and I have just recently been on a call together where we had to surface some of our own stories where we may have fumbled. So
Yep.
yeah, that's where we try to
Yeah.
root our work all the time, is
Yeah.
in our own humility and our own learning, and this is what we
Yeah.
want to explore more with you,
Yes.
our
Yeah.
community.
So come learn and be a little human with us
Yeah.
next week. Thursday is the next Leadership for Liminal Spaces webinar. There's still spots open for Know Yourself, which is going to be over 4 Sundays in June.
Yeah.
And that's it's an intense course, but it is so good, and it's so I don't know, grounding, I think, in a lot of ways. It's really raw, but we do it in such a solid community that it's, yeah, really transformative.
Yeah, and I was just rereading it, getting it ready for the new
Hmm.
group, and I was all kind of blown away by how resource heavy I made it. It is very
Yeah,
rich. I mean,
very
it's too much
rich.
for 4 weeks, but it's like you'll be left with a workbook that
Yeah,
you can, and I've had people tell me a year or two later they were rereading it because there was just so
yeah,
much value in it. So yeah, it's a
yeah,
deep program. We're gathering in a short time, but it will
yeah,
give you much for ongoing reflection.
absolutely. So come join us. We look forward to being with you in community soon.